Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas. Our ongoing study in From Paul to Valentinus by Peter Lampe. We're going to take a look at chapters 13 and 14. It'll be pages 117 through 137. And we get a look at the way that theology emerged in the post-apostolic age at the beginning of the 2nd century. Let's go to block 1 and take a look at the Acts of Peter document. Late 2nd century, some wealthy Christians did live on the Palatine Hill where the emperor lived. One such person was Apollonius. Apollonius enjoyed wealth and esteem, and Christian noblewomen outnumbered men. Young noblewomen had difficulty finding a mate of equal class. They would lose their noble rank by marrying below their class. Therefore, some joined together without legal marriage. All this was in the late 2nd century. Now, the Acta Petri document, the Acts of Peter, it is dated to 180 to 190 AD, during the reign of Commodus. It narrates Peter's activity prior to his death. And it gives us some additional historical information. By the end of the 2nd century, three Roman senators were Christian, and many aristocratic women were Christian. There were believers at every social level. Even some of the slaves in the emperor's own home were Christian. So it's a very diverse level of Christianity across the entire social structure, even within the emperor's own home. And in the governing body, Roman senators, 3 Roman senators were Christian. We don't think about that, but in the 2nd century, Christianity was becoming much more present even in the Roman political leadership. Now, block 2, we look at the theology that emerged during the 2nd century. And we already talked about it a little bit in the last lesson, about the theology of ongoing repentance. Well, now we look at the theology of agape that emerged in the apostolic tradition. Assistance from those who prosper. One Christian Roman senator, Demetrius, donated 6,000 gold pieces for ministry toward widows. The Christian senator Marcellus used his mansion to care for pilgrims and for the poor. 2 wealthy Christian women donated 10,000 gold denarii for ministry toward the poor. So, again, you've got the aristocracy and you've got the political leaders converting to Christianity. Now the apostolic tradition unfolds. Remember, the apostolic age was the 1st century. Now the 2nd century, we start looking at how the apostolic tradition developed. The apostolike paradosis is Greek for apostolic tradition, a document dated 215 AD, so end of the 2nd century, early 3rd century. It reads that deacons cared for the poor. There was even a ministry of sub-deacons as assistants, and aid was provided for widows as well. And an agape theology developed of the apostolic tradition. Burial assistance was offered to the poor for the Callistus catacomb administered by the deacon Callistus. Those who prosper also provided a ministry called the agape meal within the church for the needy. They actually had an agape meal time. This attitude also is reflected in the following practice. Wealthy women who sought baptism were not allowed to wear any kind of gold jewelry of any kind when baptized. Nothing of that nature whatsoever. You were to express humility, so no gold jewelry allowed when a wealthy woman was to be baptized. But we have the aristocracy and political leadership allowing their homes to be used for ministry to the poor. Christian faith was cutting across every social dimension, every area. And they had the agape meal, where wealthy and needy sat down together at the same table and shared a meal. Again, ministering to the poor. Now, block 3, we're going to look at education and the arts in the 2nd century. The arts. The circus games were not allowed for Christians. You would be excluded from fellowship if you attended any of those horrible circus games, really blood games. And the theatricus, the theater, was enthusiastically attended. Actors were usually slaves, paid poorly. And there were pagan fortune tellers, pagan dream interpreters. Now, education and civil service. Christians did serve in the military, in the fire brigade, and in the police. They were usually freedmen, but Christians did not become teachers because of the requirement to teach Roman mythology concerning the many Roman pagan gods. And so Christians usually didn't take up the profession of teaching. However, philosophers and physicians were given great esteem, so Christians could be accepted as philosophers or physicians, but teaching at basic educational schools, Christians shied away from it because they refused to teach the mythology of the pagan gods. Now, the visual arts, sculpting and painting were usually regarded in high esteem, and one could make a pretty good salary. Even slaves could take up this craft. So the Greco-Roman world did appreciate sculpture and painting, the visual arts. But fundamentally, in this lesson, it's all about block 2. Last lesson we talked about the emerging theology of ongoing repentance. Last lesson we talked about the theology of ongoing repentance. Now in block 2 we have agape theology, sacrificial love for the other. And we had, in block 2, we have Christian Roman senators donating money for ministry to widows and to the poor, donating their house for pilgrims and the poor. And then the apostolic tradition unfolded with a theology that practiced the agape meal. Within the house church, there would be I don't know how often they had them, but They had an agape meal for the needy. So there was after the apostolic age of the first century, we mentioned it before, but the first century ended with the letter of 1 John. And the letter of 1 John was, the entire letter taught the imperative to love one another as Christ has loved us. That is the entire theme of 1 John. That was the closing of the apostolic age. Now, at the beginning of the apostolic tradition, in the early 2nd century, we find a theology of ongoing repentance and a theology of agape, self-giving love. Agape theology, self-giving love. So it's a great lesson on the additional content for the emerging apostolic tradition being taken up early 2nd century in Rome, and being influential over Roman governorship. You've got senators, Roman senators, who become Christian and supply money and even their own mansions for ministry to widows and to the poor. So it's really Christianity starts developing its own identity and its own tradition at the end of the apostolic age in the early 2nd century. It starts defining its own identity and how it differs from pagan worship, and how it stands for the needy. It stands for ministry to the widows, and goes outside itself to minister to those who are desperate. So it's a great additional teaching on the evolving apostolic tradition. That's going to wrap up pages 117 to 137, and the next lesson will be chapters 15 and 16, 138 to 158. Next lesson will be 138 to 158, beginning at chapter 15.